the widow who bought a forgotten mountain cabin for $5. The cabin looked empty from the trail, but Clara Whitcomb knew empty places could still be guarding something. She stood at the edge of the pines with her old canvas pack cutting into her shoulders and her dead husband's coat hanging loose around her arms. The wind came down from the high Wyoming ridge sharp enough to sting her eyes. It moved through the grass, shook the porch lantern that someone had left hanging beside the door, and carried a smell she had not expected. Animal. Warm, wild, and close. Clara did not step forward at once. At 42 years old, she had learned that a woman survived longer by listening before moving. Folks in Millstone called her the tall widow, sometimes with pity, sometimes with a smirk, as if her height was a public matter. 6 feet of woman, they said, as if God had made a mistake and everybody else had been invited to comment on it. But the mountain did not laugh at her. The mountain did not care if her hands were rough, or if her boots were patched with rawhide, or if she still wore Nathan Whitcomb's coat 2 winters after he and their daughter, Lily, had been brought home from Willow Crossing beneath wet canvas. The mountain only watched, and somehow that felt kinder than people. She had come for a cabin bought with $5 silver, and a lawyer's uneasy voice still ringing in her head. "Mrs. Whitcomb," the lawyer in Cheyenne had said, sliding the deed across his desk, "the owner asked that you receive this place, said you would know why once you saw the mark beneath the hearth." Clara had asked the man's name. Gideon Vale. She had not known it. Then the lawyer had lowered his voice. "He said to tell you, he remembers the little blue ribbon your husband tied around the carved bird box he made for Lily." After that, Clara had stopped breathing right for a moment. Nobody knew about that box. Nathan had made it in the barn on 3 cold evenings, hiding it under grain sacks so Lily would not find it before her birthday. He had carved a small swallow on the lid because Lily loved watching them dip over the creek at sunset. Clara could still see Nathan bringing it into the kitchen, sawdust caught in his beard, pretending it was nothing special while his eyes begged her to praise it. Lily had kept her hair ribbons inside. After the crossing took them both, Clara locked that box in a trunk and had not opened it again. So she bought the cabin. $5 for rotting steps, lonely timber, and a trail that climbed half a day into country most riders avoided after September. Now she stood before it. The place was better kept than she expected. The roof had been repaired with fresh pine shingles. The window glass was dusty but whole. Someone had swept the porch not long ago. Whoever Gideon Vale was, he had not abandoned this cabin in the slow way. He had left it in a hurry. Clara shifted the pack higher on her shoulder and climbed the steps. The boards gave a dry groan, but they held. She noticed small things without meaning to. A boot scraped near the threshold, a nail newly hammered into the doorframe, a broken chair leg stacked neatly beside the wall instead of tossed away. Careful habits, a careful man. She reached for the latch. A growl rolled through the door before her fingers touched iron. Low, deep, certain. Clara froze. The sound seemed to enter her bones before it entered her ears. She had heard wolves in winter, bears tearing bark from trees, coyotes calling to one another under a pale moon. This was different. This was no warning tossed into the dark. This was a line drawn across the world. She took one slow step back. Her knife was in her pack. Her old revolver was wrapped in cloth at the bottom, unloaded because she had not come hunting. Foolish, maybe, but grief made a person careless in quiet ways. The growl came again. Clara looked at the door, then at the narrow gap beneath it where dust stirred with the animal's breath. "I hear you," she said softly. The mountain wind moved around the cabin. Somewhere in the trees a horse shifted. The sound was faint, but Clara heard it. Leather creaked. A hoof pressed into loose soil. Someone was out there. Not passing by. Watching. Clara did not turn her head. She kept her eyes on the door and let her body become still, the way Nathan had taught Lily to stand around skittish horses. "No need for trouble," she said, though she did not know if she was speaking to the animal inside or the person hidden among the pines. The cabin answered with silence. Then very slowly, the door opened inward by an inch. Clara had not touched it. In the darkness beyond the crack, two golden eyes caught the gray afternoon light. A mountain lion stood inside the cabin. She was not crouched to spring. She was not pacing. She stood square in the room, her head low, her ears half back, her body placed between Clara and whatever lay behind her. The animal's ribs moved with steady breath. Her tail gave one slow sweep against the floor. Clara understood at once. Not hunger. Protection. Behind the lion came the faintest sound, small and thin, like a baby whimpering in sleep. Cubs. Clara let her hands hang loose at her sides. "Well," she whispered, "seems neither one of us came here alone." The lion did not move. Clara stepped back from the door and sat on the porch, slow enough that no sudden motion could be mistaken for a threat. The cold wood pressed through her skirt. Her knees ached from the climb. Her heart was beating hard, but not from fear alone. Something about the cabin was wrong. A man she did not know had led her here with a memory no stranger should have. A wild mother had taken shelter inside as if she had been placed there to keep the room guarded. And somewhere in the timber, a rider had gone quiet after realizing Clara had heard him. She lowered her pack beside her and kept her face toward the open crack. "I won't trouble your young," Clara said. The lion blinked once. That was all. The sun dipped behind the ridge and the first blue shadow crossed the clearing. Clara pulled Nathan's coat tighter around her. The porch lantern swung in the wind, though it held no flame. From beneath the floorboards near her boots came a small hollow tap. Not the sound of wood settling. A loose board. Clara looked down. There, half hidden under dust, someone had scratched a little mark into the porch plank. A swallow with open wings. Her breath caught. Then from the trees behind her, a man's voice whispered, "Don't open it yet." Clara turned slowly. But all she saw were pines, snow-colored sky, and the dark shape of a rider slipping away between the trunks. Clara did not chase the rider. Every part of her old ranger sense told her not to. A person who whispered from the trees and vanished before he could be seen was either frightened, guilty, or trying to keep another person alive. Any of those choices meant he was not to be followed blind into dark timber with a mountain lion at her back and a secret under her boots. So she stayed seated on the porch, one hand resting on Nathan's old coat, the other near the strap of her pack. The pines swallowed the last sound of the horse. After that, only the wind remained. It moved down the slope in long, cold breaths, bending the dry grass around the cabin and lifting the edge of Clara's skirt against her boots. The sky had gone purple above the ridge. Far off, thunder muttered, though the air smelled more of snow than rain. Inside the cabin, the lion had not left the doorway. Clara turned back toward those golden eyes. "You heard him too," she said. The lion stared, as if she had heard more than Clara ever could. That thought made Clara's skin tighten. She looked down again at the scratched swallow on the porch plank. It was not large. A careless person might have missed it or mistaken it for a knife mark made by some bored hand. But Clara knew better. Nathan had carved birds the same way, simple lines, wings lifted, the body bent as if caught in the first brave second of flight. This mark had been made for her. "Do not open it yet." The warning sat in her mind like a stone. She wanted to pry up the board that very moment. She wanted to claw at it with her fingernails until the porch gave up whatever Gideon veil had hidden there. But wanting was not wisdom. The man in the trees had known she would find it. He had known she might open it. And he had risked speaking. That meant someone else might be listening. Clara rose slowly, lifted her pack, and moved to the far end of the porch. She did not enter the cabin. The mountain lion had claimed that right for now, and Clara was not fool enough to argue with a mother protecting her young. She unrolled her blanket near the corner where the roof gave a little shelter from the wind. Then she took out a biscuit wrapped in cloth, broke it in half, and ate without tasting much. The lion watched from the crack in the door. After a while, Clara said, "I had a girl once." The words came out before she could stop them. The lion's ears shifted. "Lily," Clara continued, quieter now. "She used to sleep curled sideways like she was trying to take up the whole bed, small as a sparrow, but she could fill any room she walked into." A thin sound came from inside, one of the cubs waking and settling again. Clara looked down at the biscuit in her hand. She loved animals, even mean ones, especially mean ones, I think, said they only looked mean because no one had been kind long enough. Her throat tightened, she stopped talking. The lion did not come closer, but she did not retreat either. Night settled hard over the clearing. Clara wrapped herself in Nathan's coat and lay with her back to the cabin wall. She kept the marked plank within reach, though she did not touch it. Sleep came in broken pieces. Once she woke to the sound of paws moving inside, once to the small cries of cubs, once to a branch snapping somewhere beyond the clearing. Each time she opened her eyes, the world was dark and still. Before dawn, snow began. Not heavy, just a soft white dust drifting through the trees and landing on the porch rail, her blanket, her boots. Clara woke with her hair damp at the edges and her fingers stiff from cold. The cabin door was partly open now. The mountain lion stood on the porch. Clara did not move. The animal was only a few steps away. Her breath showed in pale clouds. Snow touched the top of her head and melted there. She looked past Clara toward the eastern trees. Then she turned and stepped back into the cabin. It felt like permission. Clara sat up slowly. Her joints complained. She took the knife from her pack, not to threaten, only to work. Then she knelt beside the plank with the swallow mark. The wood came loose too easily. Someone had lifted it many times. Beneath was a narrow space wrapped in oilcloth. Clara pulled the bundle free and placed it on her lap. Her hand stayed steady until she saw the blue ribbon tied around it. Lily's color. Not the same ribbon, surely. It could not be. Clara had buried Lily's favorite ribbon with her, but it was the same shade, soft sky blue, faded at the fold. She untied it with care. Inside the oilcloth was a flat tin box, and inside that, a letter, a brass key, and a small charcoal drawing of Willow crossing bridge. Clara did not touch the drawing first. She read the letter. "Mrs. Whitcomb, if this reaches your hands, then I am either hiding, taken, or dead. My name is Gideon Vale. I rode with your husband before he became a husband, before I became a man who trusted paper more than people. Nathan once saved my life in a spring flood near Laramie. I owed him truth. I failed to give it in time." Clara's eyes moved faster. "Your husband and daughter did not die because of rain, darkness, or a weak bridge. That crossing was made to fail. Nathan had found proof that powerful men were stealing from federal land beneath Hollow Crown Ridge. He reported it. Someone buried the report. Then someone buried him." The wind dragged at the porch lantern, making it knock softly against the wall. Clara read the next line. "The men responsible want what is hidden under the hearthstone. The key is for the iron chest below. Trust no sheriff from Millstone. Trust no rider who names Caldwell Pierce as employer. If you see a man with a white scar through his left eyebrow, do not let him know what you have found. He was once my friend. He is no longer anyone's friend." Clara lowered the letter. Snow drifted between the porch boards. Her breath came slow, but her heart had changed its rhythm. For 2 years, she had believed grief was a storm that came for no reason. Now someone was telling her the storm had a hand behind it. A hand with a name. Caldwell Pierce. She folded the letter and put it inside Nathan's coat. Then she stood and faced the cabin door. The mountain lion was inside near the hearth, watching her. Clara stepped across the threshold. The room smelled of cold ashes, dust, and wild fur. In the corner, 2 cubs huddled in an old quilt beneath a table. One lifted its small head and blinked. "I won't touch them," Clara whispered. The lion's tail moved once. Clara crossed to the hearth. A large flat stone sat before the fireplace, blackened at the edges from years of use. At first it looked ordinary. Then she saw another swallow mark, cut low near the corner. She used the knife, then both hands. The stone shifted. Beneath it was an iron ring set into wood. Clara pulled. A square door opened into darkness. Cold air breathed up from below. Before she could reach for her lamp, hoofbeats sounded outside. Not one rider this time. Several. Coming fast up the western trail. The mountain lion rose with a growl that filled the cabin from wall to wall. Clara gripped the brass key in her fist and looked toward the window. Through the falling snow, 5 horses entered the clearing. The man at the front had a white scar cutting through his left eyebrow. The man with the scar did not hurry down from his horse. That told Clara more than any shouted threat could have. A reckless man would have rushed the porch. A frightened man would have drawn his gun too soon. This one sat still beneath the falling snow, letting the silence work for him, as if the mountain itself had been hired to stand at his back. He wore a dark wool coat buttoned to the throat and a black hat with a narrow brim. Snow gathered on his shoulders and melted in the crease of the scar above his left eye. His face was lean and pale from old winters, but his eyes were sharp and dry. He looked at the cabin, then at the open door, then at Clara standing inside with the brass key hidden in her fist. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he called. His voice was calm. That made Clara dislike it more. The mountain lion stood near the hearthstone, body low, head forward. Her growl had quieted, but the sound remained under the floor of the room, a living warning. The cubs were tucked behind the table, small bodies pressed together beneath the quilt. Clara kept herself between the riders and the open square in the floor. "You know my name," she said. The scarred man tipped his head slightly. "Most folks do once they see you." One of the riders behind him laughed under his breath. Clara did not look at him. She had heard that laugh all her life. Men used it when they wanted to make themselves taller without standing up straighter. The scarred man lifted one gloved hand, and the laughter stopped. "My name is Amos Rusk," he said. "I work for Mr. Caldwell Pierce. We were told this cabin had changed hands. Came to make sure there was no misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Clara said. "I bought it legal." "So I heard." "Then you can ride back down and tell him the mountain air agrees with me." Rusk smiled without warmth. "Wish it were that simple." The 4 men behind him sat spread across the clearing. They had not drawn weapons, but Clara saw rifles in scabbards and revolvers at their hips. Their horses were fine animals, well fed and brushed, the kind owned by men who had money behind them. Not drifters, not hungry thieves, paid hands. Paid hands were often more dangerous than desperate men. They did not have to be angry to do harm. They only had to obey. Rusk glanced past Clara into the cabin. His gaze stopped near the hearth. "You alone up there?" Clara felt the key bite into her palm. "Depends who's asking." "A friend would ask." "A friend would have knocked before bringing 4 armed men to my door." That made Rusk's mouth tighten. Inside the cabin, the lion took one step forward. Rusk saw her then. For the first time, something real moved across his face. Not fear exactly, calculation. His horse felt it too and shifted beneath him, blowing hard through its nose. The other horses stirred, hooves scraping snow over stone. "Well now," Rusk said quietly, "that explains the tracks." Clara's voice stayed even. She has young. I am not here for cats. No, you're here for what's under my floor. The words left her before caution could catch them. Rusk's eyes returned to her face, and she knew she had confirmed too much. A smarter woman might have played ignorant longer, but grief and anger had been sitting in her chest for 2 years like coals under ash, and the letter in Nathan's coat had stirred them red. Rusk dismounted. The lion growled again. He paused with one boot in the snow and raised his hands slightly, palms out. No need to turn this foolish. It was foolish when you climbed the trail. I only need a box that does not belong to you. Clara thought of the letter, the bridge drawing, the key, Gideon Vale hiding somewhere or gone forever because he had trusted the wrong man once. Nathan's name pulled from the grave and placed under a colder light. Lily's blue ribbon tied around a warning. Everything in this cabin belongs to me now, she said. Rusk's face hardened. You don't know what you're standing in. I'm beginning to. He stepped toward the porch. The mountain lion came fully into view. It happened so fast the men behind Rusk pulled their reins tight. The lion did not leap. She did not attack. She simply appeared in the doorway beside Clara, broad and silent, her golden eyes fixed on Amos Rusk with such steady judgment that the whole clearing seemed to shrink around him. Rusk stopped at the bottom step. Clara could hear her own breathing. She could hear snow falling against the porch roof. She could hear one of the cubs moving softly behind her. And beneath all of it, she heard another sound. A low whistle from the eastern trees. Not loud, not meant for the riders, meant for her. Clara did not turn, but her eyes shifted enough to catch movement beyond the clearing. A dark horse stood half-hidden between 2 pines. Beside it, a man in a brown coat held one finger to his lips. The same rider from the night before. Then he pointed toward the back of the cabin. Clara understood. He had not come to save her, not exactly. He had come to show her a way out. Rusk took one more slow step. Mrs. Whitcomb, there are men in this territory who can make your life harder than it has already been. Clara almost laughed. Harder? There was a cruelty in that word, when spoken to a woman who had already stood over 2 graves with wet earth on her hem. My life is not the thing you should threaten, she said. His eyes narrowed. The lion's tail flicked once against Clara's skirt. Behind Clara, the square door in the floor remained open. Cold air rose from below. If she went down, she might trap herself. If she stayed, Rusk would keep talking until he found courage or excuse enough to enter. If she ran out the back, she would have only the letter, the key, and whatever trust she could place in a stranger hiding among the pines. Trust was a dangerous bridge. But so was standing still on one that had already been cut. Clara backed up 1 step. Rusk noticed. The lion noticed too. Clara whispered, "Guard them." The lion did not look at her, but she moved forward just enough to fill the doorway. Clara turned, crossed the cabin, grabbed the tin box and shoved it into her pack. She snatched the folded bridge drawing from the hearth and pushed it inside Nathan's coat. Then she slipped through the narrow back door into the snow. If this moment has your heart leaning toward Clara, stay with her, because the truth hidden in that mountain has only begun to breathe. The stranger was waiting behind the woodpile. Up close, he was younger than she expected, perhaps 35, with tired gray eyes and a beard trimmed badly by a man who had been living rough. His hat was pulled low, and his left sleeve was torn near the cuff. He held no weapon in his hands. "This way," he whispered. "Who are you?" Someone Gideon should have trusted sooner. That is not an answer. It is the only one we have time for. From the front of the cabin, Rusk shouted, "Mrs. Whitcomb." A horse screamed. Then came the thunder of hooves scattering, as the mountain lion made her decision. The stranger grabbed Clara's pack strap and pulled her toward the trees. Run now, doubt me later. Clara ran. Branches clawed at Nathan's coat. Snow slapped her face. Behind her, men shouted not in pain but in surprise and fear. A gunshot cracked through the trees, fired wild into the air. Clara stumbled over a hidden root. The stranger caught her by the arm. For 1 second their eyes met. "You have his key," he said. Clara went cold. "How do you know that?" Before he could answer, a bullet struck the pine beside them, spraying bark across Clara's cheek. The stranger shoved her behind a boulder and drew his revolver at last. From the cabin clearing came Amos Rusk's voice, no longer calm. "Find her before she reaches the ridge." Clara pressed her back against the cold boulder and held her breath, while bark dust settled in her hair. The stranger crouched beside her, revolver low, eyes fixed on the trees behind them. He did not look like a man eager for a fight. He looked like a man who had spent too many years learning how quickly one wrong sound could end a life. His jaw was tight. His hand was steady. Another bullet cracked through the pines and struck somewhere above them. Snow fell from the branches in a soft white sheet. Clara flinched, then hated herself for it. The stranger glanced at her. "You hit." "No." "Can you run?" "I climbed half a mountain yesterday with grief on my back. I can run." A quick, surprised look crossed his face. Not amusement, respect maybe. Then he nodded toward a narrow break between the rocks. "There's a deer trail down through the wash. It curves east, then north. If we reach the old miner's cut, horses can't follow easy." "Who are you?" Clara demanded again. He listened past her question. Men were shouting behind them now, voices scattered through the trees. Rusk had divided them. That was dangerous, but it also meant the men were uncertain. "My name is Jonah Reed," he said. "I worked under Gideon Vale." "Worked doing what?" "Finding the truth too late." That answer did not satisfy her, but a shout came closer before she could press him. "There," one of Rusk's men called. Jonah rose, just enough to fire once into the air above the man's head. The answering curse told Clara he had not aimed to kill. "Move," Jonah said. They ran. The deer trail was hardly a trail at all, only a thin, dark line between stones and brush where animals had chosen the same safe steps over many seasons. Clara's boots slipped twice on wet leaves hidden under snow, but she kept her balance. Her pack struck her shoulder blades. The brass key in her fist had gone warm from her grip. Behind them, a horse tried to force its way through the timber, then reared with a sharp cry. Men shouted. Branches snapped. Rusk was pushing hard, but the mountain did not favor men who believed money could make every path wide. Jonah led her down into a wash cut by spring floods. Gray stones lined the bottom. Ice had begun to lace the shallow water. Clara stepped into it without complaint, though the cold bit through her boots at once. "Water hides tracks," Jonah said. "I know." He looked back at her again, as if remembering she was not some helpless town widow. That look angered her more than it should have. "Nathan taught me tracking before we were married," she said. "I spent 15 years reading land for the Territorial Range Office. Do not explain snow to me unless it has changed its habits." Jonah almost smiled, but it died before it became one. "Fair enough." They followed the wash for several minutes, moving bent beneath low branches. The shouting faded, then returned, carried strangely by the ravine walls. Clara could not tell if Rusk's men were close or only loud. Her lungs burned. Her wet feet had gone numb. Still, a harder fire burned under all of it. Nathan had not died by chance. Lily had not died because God had looked away. Some living man had chosen the place, the timing, the weakness in a bridge beam. Someone had gone home afterward, eaten supper, slept under a roof, and let Clara stand at two graves believing the world was merely cruel. That thought made her run faster. At last Jonah turned sharply toward a dark split in the slope. It looked like nothing until they were nearly upon it. Then Clara saw old timbers half buried under brush. The mouth of a narrow miner's cut sunk into the ridge. "In here," Jonah said. Clara stopped. "No." He turned. "We cannot outrun them in open timber. And I am not walking blind into a hole with a man I do not know." His face tightened with frustration. Then, instead of arguing, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden token. He tossed it to her. Clara caught it. Her breath caught with it. A swallow had been carved into the face, rougher than Nathan's, but clearly copied from the same pattern. On the back were 3 letters. GV. "Gideon gave me that before he vanished," Jonah said. "Told me if the tall widow came, I was to keep her alive long enough to open the chest." Clara looked from the token to his face. "Why didn't you come to the porch?" "Because Rusk had men watching the western trail before you ever reached the cabin. I got close last night, but not close enough. When you found the porch mark, I warned you because there was a spy below the ridge with a field glass." Clara's fingers closed around the token. "Gideon is alive." Jonah looked away. That small movement told her the answer was not simple. "I don't know," he said. 3 weeks ago he sent me to watch the cabin. Said if he did not return by the first hard snow, I was to assume Pierce had moved against him." "And you waited." "I searched first." His voice sharpened, but the pain under it was plain enough. "I searched the north gullies, the old survey camp, the burned line shack, and every place he ever hid papers. I found blood on a saddle blanket and boot tracks that ended near Raven Drop. No body, no hat, no grave, just enough sign to keep a man from sleeping." Clara wanted to hate him for not knowing more, but grief in his face stopped her. A rider's voice echoed from above the wash. Jonah stepped into the mine opening. "Now you can doubt me in there, or Rusk can find us out here." Clara followed. The darkness swallowed them quickly. Jonah struck a match and lit a small lantern hidden behind a rock just inside the entrance. Its weak glow showed rough walls, old pick marks, and timber supports silvered with age. The air smelled of stone, rust, and earth that had not seen sunlight in years. Clara listened. Hooves passed above them. Slow. Searching. She and Jonah stood close in the dark, not speaking. Dust floated in the lantern light. Water dripped somewhere deep inside the cut. Then Amos Rusk's voice sounded from the ridge overhead. "She has the papers, maybe the key too. Mr. Pierce will not forgive another failure." Another man answered, too low for Clara to make out. Rusk spoke again, colder now. "Then burn the cabin if you have to. Smoke out the cat, search the hearth, and bring me what she missed." Clara's heart slammed against her ribs. "The lion. The cubs." She turned toward the mine entrance, but Jonah caught her arm. "No. She's trapped in there with her young. If you go back now, you give Rusk everything." Clara shoved his hand away. Her eyes burned, and not from cold. "That animal stood in front of me when men came armed to my door." "She is not your daughter," Jonah said. The words struck harder than he meant them to. Clara went still. Jonah's face changed at once. Regret entered it quick and deep. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Clara looked toward the pale mouth of the mine, where snowlight waited beyond darkness. "No," she said, voice low, "she is not my daughter." Her hand closed around the brass key. "But I know what it means to be unable to save a child." Above them, the riders began moving back toward the cabin. Clara stood in the old miner's cut with the brass key pressed into her palm, and heard the riders turn back toward the cabin. For one hard moment, the world narrowed to a choice no decent person should have to make. The papers in her pack might prove Nathan and Lily had been murdered. The key might open the iron chest Gideon Vale had hidden beneath the hearth. The truth might finally have a voice. But behind that cabin door was a mother with two small lives tucked under a quilt. Jonah watched Clara's face and seemed to understand the shape of her decision before she spoke. "There may be another way in," he said quietly. Clara turned to him. "Say it plain." "This cut runs under part of the ridge. Gideon told me old miners once used it to reach a storage crawl beneath the cabin. I never found the passage, but he said it existed." "You never thought to mention that before." "I was busy keeping you from being shot." "That is not an answer I care for." "I know." The honesty in his voice made her anger stumble, but only for a breath. Jonah lifted the lantern and turned deeper into the cut. "If the passage is real, it should be on the right wall before the first cave-in. Gideon said there was a swallow mark." Clara did not wait. She moved past him into the dark. The tunnel bent low, forcing her to duck. Her shoulders brushed cold stone. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead, each drop sounding louder than it ought to. The lantern threw long shadows that moved like living things along the walls. Clara scanned every beam, every stone, every old mark left by pick and hand. Behind her, Jonah whispered, "Slow down. Old cuts can sink without warning." "My whole life has been sinking without warning," she said. "I have learned to step anyway." They moved another 20 paces. Then Clara saw it. A small swallow carved into a support beam, nearly hidden beneath black dust. She stopped and touched it with 2 fingers. The carving was rough, but the wing line was familiar enough to hurt. Not Nathan's hand, but made by someone who had studied him closely. Gideon had been leaving a trail only Clara was meant to understand. Beside the beam, a section of wall looked natural until Jonah held the lantern closer. Then Clara saw the outline of boards packed with dirt. Together they pulled them loose. Cold air slipped through the gap. "Not mine air. Cabin air." Clara dropped to her knees and crawled through first. The passage was narrow, mean, and dark. Rocks scraped her elbows. Her pack caught once, and for a second panic rose in her throat, thick and childish. She forced it down. She had stood beside coffins. She could crawl through earth. The passage climbed, then ended beneath wooden planks. Above them, men moved inside the cabin. Clara froze. A voice said, "Hearthstone's been shifted." Another answered, "Rusk said the widow got to it." "Then why are we still here?" "Because if she missed anything, we find it." A third voice cursed softly, "And what about that cat?" There was a growl so deep it made dust fall on Clara's cheek. One man said, "I'm not going near those cubs." A crueler voice answered, "Then smoke them out like Rusk said." Clara's fingers found the underside of the plank above her. Rage rose in her so clean, and cold it steadied every part of her body. Jonah leaned close behind her. "There are 3 of them." "I heard." "We need surprise, not fury." "I can carry both." Before he could stop her, Clara pushed. The plank lifted behind the pantry wall, not far from the hearth. Clara came up from the floor like the mountain itself had given her back. The nearest man turned, eyes wide. She swung the loose plank hard against his wrist. His revolver fell and skidded under the table. Jonah came through behind her and aimed his gun at the other 2. "Hands where I can see them," he said. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the mountain lion stepped from the bedroom doorway. The men understood faster than words could teach them. One raised his hands at once. The other backed toward the front door, face pale beneath his hat. Clara picked up the fallen revolver and pointed it at the floor near their boots. "You are leaving this cabin." The cruel-voiced man swallowed. "Rusk will skin us for coming back empty." "No," Clara said. "He will only have to hear you admit you were frightened by a widow and a mother cat. That shame might do you some good." Jonah looked at her sideways, but the men obeyed. They backed through the door with their hands raised and stumbled onto the porch. Outside, one of them shouted to Rusk that the cabin was cursed. Clara did not mind the lie. Fear could do useful work when truth needed time. Hooves scattered again, this time moving away from the clearing. Clara stood still until the last sound faded. Then her arm dropped. The lion remained near the bedroom, watching her. Snowlight lay across the animal's face. One cub peeked from behind her leg, round-eyed and trembling. Clara's breath broke in a way she did not expect. She turned away quickly, but not before Jonah saw. He said nothing, that was wise. If you believe a wounded heart can still choose mercy, stay with this story, because Clara's hardest choice is still waiting below the hearth. After a long silence, Clara crossed to the fireplace. The square door beneath the hearthstone stood open. A short wooden ladder led down into darkness. Jonah knelt beside it. That will be the storage room. Clara took the lantern from him. No more waiting. She descended first. The room below was colder than the mine and far better made. Stone walls had been smoothed by hand. Shelves lined one side, filled with maps, oilcloth bundles, ledgers, and jars of rock samples streaked with silver. Against the far wall sat an iron chest. Its lock was shaped like a swallow. Clara stepped toward it, the brass key ready. Her hand trembled now. Not from fear, from what might be inside. She placed the key in the lock and turned. The chest opened with a low metal sigh. Inside lay survey maps, letters tied with black string, a folded bridge diagram, and on top of them all, a small wooden box Clara knew so well her knees nearly failed. Lily's ribbon box. The swallow Nathan had carved still spread its wings across the lid. Clara touched it with both hands. Under the box was a note in Gideon Vale's writing. "Forgive me, Nathan. I found it in the wreckage and kept it safe until I found the courage to tell her the truth." Clara closed her eyes. Above them, from somewhere beyond the cabin, Amos Rusk's voice carried through the snow. "Mrs. Whitcomb, you have until sundown to bring out what you found. After that, Mr. Pierce comes himself." Sundown. The words seemed to settle into the underground room like another body. Clara stood over the open iron chest with Lily's ribbon box in her hands, and for a moment she could not make herself move. The room was cold. The lantern flame trembled. Dust rested on the shelves, on the ledgers, on the little wooden box Nathan had carved with love in his hands and sawdust on his shirt. She had buried her daughter without it. That thought struck her harder than the warning outside. Jonah must have seen something change in her face because he lowered his voice. "Clara." She did not answer. She opened the box. Inside, the blue ribbon lay folded small, faded at the edges but still bright enough to pull breath from her chest. Beneath it was a little paper flower Lily had once made from a church notice, and a silver button from Nathan's old vest. Small treasures. Child treasures, the kind grown folks might toss away without knowing they held a whole world. Clara touched the ribbon with one finger. Lily had worn it the morning she rode out to meet Nathan. Her hair had been braided crooked because she insisted she could do it herself. She had kissed Clara's cheek and said, "We'll be home before supper, Mama." Before supper. 2 words that had lived inside Clara for 2 years like a door left open in winter. Jonah looked away, giving her the only privacy the room allowed. Clara closed the box carefully and placed it inside her pack. Her grief did not leave. It changed shape. It stood straighter. Then she reached for the papers. The first ledger showed payments made through false companies. The second held names of men in Millstone, Cheyenne, and the federal land office who had taken money to hide survey records. A packet of letters tied with black string named Caldwell Pierce again, and again without naming him plainly, the way guilty men wrote when they believed careful words could wash dirty hands. But the bridge diagram was different. It had no softness in it. Lines showed the support beam at Willow Crossing. Notes described where the cut had been made, how rain would weaken the scarred timber, how the bridge would hold for light passage but fail beneath wagon weight. The handwriting belonged to a man who understood wood. Clara read the final line aloud, though her voice nearly broke. Work done by A. Rusk, under order of C.P. Jonah became very still. Clara looked at him. Amos Rusk cut the bridge. Jonah's face hardened with a quiet disgust. Then he came here today knowing exactly whose door he stood before. Yes, Clara said. Above them the mountain lion growled. Not at them. At something outside. Jonah took the lantern and moved to the ladder. Clara packed the documents fast, wrapping them in oilcloth and tying them close beneath Lily's box. She took only what mattered most: evidence, not weight, truth, not clutter. Her old field training returned with sharp hands. A person could drown in paper if she tried to carry every scrap. When they climbed back into the cabin, the room had gone dim. Snow pressed against the windows, blurring the clearing into pale gray. The lion stood near the front door, ears forward. Her cubs hid beneath the table again. Jonah crossed to the side window and lifted the curtain by a finger's width. Rusk is not gone, he said. Clara joined him. At the far edge of the clearing, 3 men waited among the trees. No horses in sight, which meant they had tied them deeper back. Rusk stood with his dark coat pulled tight, his scar like a pale slash in the fading light. He was watching the cabin with the patience of a man who had done cruel work before and learned that fear often ripened if left alone. He wants us to feel trapped, Jonah said. We are trapped. Not yet. Clara turned from the window. Where can the papers go? There is a relay station below the North Ridge. How far? 3 hours if the trail is clear. Clara looked at the snow thickening against the glass. It will not be clear. No. Can you ride it? Jonah hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. She studied him properly for the first time. His coat hid it badly, but his left side was stiff. Earlier in the rush she had missed it. Now she saw how he favored one leg and kept his breathing shallow. You are hurt. Old trouble. Do not dress a lie in Sunday clothes. He gave a tired breath. Rusk's men caught me 4 nights ago near the ridge. I got away, but not clean. Clara's anger softened against her will. Why help me then? Jonah looked toward the hearth, toward the open place below it, toward all the secrets Gideon had hidden. Because I helped Pierce before I understood what he was. The words were plain, but shame lived under them. Clara waited. I was a surveyor, he said. I marked land, I drew routes. I told myself I was only making maps. Then Gideon showed me what Pierce did with those maps, which homes he wanted cleared, which reports disappeared, which men had accidents after they asked questions. And Nathan. Jonah shut his eyes briefly. I marked the old freight road near Willow Crossing. I did not know why Pierce wanted it, not then. Clara looked at him for a long moment. It would have been easy to hate him. Part of her wanted to, but his guilt was not clean enough to satisfy her anger. It had cracks in it, regret, fear, a man trying late to stand on the right side of a grave. You will answer for what you did, she said. I know. But first we get these papers to someone who can make Pierce answer too. Jonah nodded. A shout came from outside. Time is thinning, Mrs. Whitcomb, Rusk called. No sense freezing for a dead man's papers. Clara moved to the door but did not open it. You cut the bridge. Silence answered first. Then Rusk laughed softly. Gideon was always too fond of writing things down. The admission chilled her more than denial would have. Did my daughter see your face? Clara asked. Jonah looked at her sharply. Outside, Rusk did not answer. That silence told Clara enough. The mountain lion stepped closer to the door and growled so low the window glass trembled. Clara lifted Lily's ribbon box from her pack and held it against her chest. "You will not get what is in this cabin." Rusk's voice changed, the smoothness left it. "Then no one will." Jonah pulled Clara back from the door. A moment later, a burning bottle smashed through the front window. Fire spread across the curtain in one bright, hungry breath. Fire climbed the curtain like it had been waiting there all winter. For one breath, Clara saw nothing but orange light. It filled the front window, ran along the dry cloth, and reached hungry fingers toward the pine wall. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in a black wave. The mountain lion sprang back with a sharp snarl, her body folding around the space where her cubs hid beneath the table. Jonah grabbed the old wool rug from beside the hearth and beat at the flames. "Water," he shouted. Clara was already moving. There was no bucket filled by the door, no mercy waiting where she needed it. She snatched the coffee pot from the stove and threw what little remained against the burning curtain. Steam burst up. The fire hissed but did not die. It bit into the wood frame and kept climbing. Outside, Amos Rusk called, "Last chance, widow." Clara did not answer him. She tore Nathan's coat from her shoulders, wrapped it around both hands, and yanked the burning curtain down. Pain flashed through the cloth into her palms, but she held tight and threw the whole thing onto the stone hearth. Jonah smothered it with the rug until the worst of the flames died into smoke and red threads. The room coughed and groaned around them. The cubs cried. The lion turned in a tight circle, torn between the door, the fire, and her young. Clara dropped to her knees beside the table. "Easy," she said, though her own voice was rough from smoke. "Easy now." The smaller cub had tangled itself in the quilt. Its little paw clawed at the cloth in panic. Clara reached out, then stopped. The lion's head snapped toward her. "I know," Clara whispered. "I know." She moved slower than fear wanted. Her burned hands trembled, but she kept them open. The lion watched, every muscle ready. Clara touched the quilt, not the cub, and pulled the cloth loose. The cub scrambled back against its mother. The lion stared at Clara for one long second. Then she turned away from her. That was trust, or close enough to break Clara's heart. Jonah pulled her up. "We cannot stay in here if he throws another." "He will." Smoke curled from the broken window. Cold snow blew in through the shattered glass, soft white against black ash. Clara grabbed her pack and checked the oilcloth bundle inside. The papers were still safe. Lily's box was safe. The brass key hung from a string she had tied around her wrist. Those things mattered, but the cabin had changed. It was no longer shelter. It was a trap with walls. "Back passage?" Jonah asked. Clara shook her head. "If we go through the mine, they may follow the wash." "Then we split." "No." He faced her. "Listen to me. Rusk wants the papers. He believes you have them. If you run with the empty tin box, I can carry the real bundle through the cut." Clara looked at him as if he had handed her spoiled meat. "You think I will trust you with Nathan's truth? I think we both die if you do not trust someone." The words hit the room hard. Above the wind, Clara heard men moving outside. Not close yet. Careful. Rusk was testing the cabin like a man tapping ice before crossing a creek. Clara looked at Jonah's tired gray eyes. She thought of what he had confessed, what he had failed to know, and what he was trying to mend too late. Trust was not forgiveness. She did not owe him that. But there was a difference between a clean man and a useful one, and right now the mountain had given her no clean choices. She opened the pack, took out the oilcloth bundle, then stopped. "No," she said. Jonah frowned. "No. We do not split the truth, we split the lie." She pulled the tin box from the pack and filled it with useless papers from Gideon's shelves, old blank forms, cracked maps, anything that looked important in a hurry. Then she wrapped Lily's box and the real documents in Nathan's coat, tying the sleeves tight around them. Jonah understood. Rusk chases the tin. and the coat goes through the passage. Who carries it? Clara looked down at her burned hands. Then at the lion. Jonah followed her gaze. You cannot mean that. The lion stood near the back wall, her cubs pressed against her. Smoke drifted above her head. She was restless now, glancing toward the narrow pantry, toward the hidden plank that opened to the old passage. She knows the way out, Clara said. Animals always know the way out before people do. That bundle is everything. No, Clara said softly. Those cubs are everything to her. She will carry herself and them where the air is clean. The passage comes out near the miner's cut. If we drive Rusk toward the front, she may take the back. Jonah looked doubtful, but another bottle struck the porch outside and burst into flame against the steps. The time for better plans had passed. Clara tied Nathan's coat bundle tight and placed it near the pantry opening. She did not try to touch the lion. She only pointed toward the hidden way, then looked at the cubs. Go on, she said. Take what you can save. For a moment, the lion only watched her. Then she took one cub gently by the scruff and vanished through the pantry gap. Clara let out a breath she had not known she was holding. The lion returned for the second cub, then paused beside Nathan's coat bundle. She sniffed it. The scent of smoke, man, grief, and old cedar clung to the wool. Then, as if accepting one more strange duty from the human woman who had spared her young, she gripped the tied sleeves in her teeth and dragged the bundle into the dark. Clara turned away before tears could rise. Jonah handed her the false tin box. Now what? Now we give Rusk what he thinks he wants. They moved to the front door. Smoke stung Clara's eyes. Outside, Rusk stood near the porch with two men behind him, guns drawn but low. Clara opened the door. Snow blew in. She lifted the tin box where he could see it. Rusk smiled. That is sensible, he said. No, Clara answered, it is bait. Before he could understand, Jonah fired at the porch lantern above Rusk's head. Glass shattered. Flames spilled down into the snow, and the horses tied near the trees screamed and pulled loose. In the sudden chaos, Clara threw the tin box as hard as she could into the dark western brush. Every man turned toward it. Every man except Amos Rusk. His eyes stayed on Clara, and in them she saw the terrible moment when he realized the real truth had gone another way. Amos Rusk did not chase the tin box. That was how Clara knew he was more dangerous than the men around him. The others broke toward the western brush like hounds after a thrown bone. One stumbled in the snow. Another shouted that he saw it near the rocks. Their boots crashed through dead grass and low pine, all noise and greed. But Rusk stood at the bottom of the porch steps with smoke curling between him and Clara, his scar pale above one hard eye. He had understood. Not everything, maybe, not the passage, not the lion, not Nathan's coat tied around the truth, but enough. His gaze moved past Clara toward the cabin's back wall. Clever, he said. Jonah raised his revolver. Rusk raised his own faster. The shot cracked across the clearing. Jonah jerked sideways and fell against the doorframe. His revolver fired into the porch roof, tearing loose splinters. Clara caught him by the back of his coat before he dropped. Blood darkened his sleeve near the shoulder. Jonah. Go, he said through his teeth. Rusk started up the steps. Clara shoved Jonah inside and slammed the door with her shoulder. The wood shook as Rusk hit it from outside. Smoke still drifted in the room. The broken window let in snow and cold air. Behind her, the pantry gap stood open, dark and narrow. Jonah gripped his wounded arm. He knows. I saw. Then he'll circle back. Clara crossed to the hearth and grabbed a heavy iron poker. Her burned palm screamed at the touch, but she held on. Pain had become another weather inside her. It mattered, but it did not get to lead. Outside, Rusk shouted to his men, "Leave the box around back." The men in the brush cursed, footsteps turned. The false trail had bought only seconds. Clara pulled Jonah toward the pantry. "Can you crawl?" "I can bleed and crawl, that close enough." "It will have to be." He dropped to his knees and forced himself into the passage. Clara followed, dragging a loose board back over the opening behind her. The dark closed tight around them. Ahead, Jonah moved slowly, one hand pressed to his shoulder, his breath sharp each time the passage narrowed. Behind them, the cabin door crashed open. Rusk's voice entered the house. "Find the back way." Clara crawled faster. The earth pressed close on both sides. Her elbows struck stone. Her skirt caught on a root. The smell of smoke gave way to cold dirt and old timber. Ahead, Jonah's lantern was gone, left behind in the rush, so they moved by touch and memory, following the small upward pull of air. A sound came from somewhere ahead. Not human. A soft cub cry. Clara froze. She made it. "Keep moving," Jonah whispered. The passage opened into the old miner's cut. Pale snowlight glowed from the entrance. The mountain lion stood there with one cub tucked behind a rock and the other pressed beneath her chest. Nathan's coat bundle lay beside her paws, damp with snow but whole. Clara crawled out and went to it. For the first time since the fire started, her breath came fully. The papers were safe. Lily's box was safe. Nathan's coat was scorched at one cuff but still tied tight, still holding what remained of the life stolen from her. The lion watched Clara touch the bundle. Then the animal looked toward the tunnel they had just escaped. A growl began in her chest. Jonah leaned against the mine wall, face gray. "They're coming." Clara looked toward the cut entrance. Snow fell thicker now, turning the outside world into a blur of white trunks and dark stone. The ridge beyond the mine sloped upward toward a line of black rocks. "Where does that lead?" she asked. "Raven Notch." "Can horses climb it?" "Not in this snow." "Can men?" "Badly." "Good." Jonah gave a strained laugh, then winced. "You and the mountain are starting to sound alike." Clara lifted Nathan's coat bundle and tied it high across her shoulders. Then she picked up Jonah's revolver from where he had tucked it into his belt and handed it back to him. "Can you still aim?" "With this arm, not well." "Then aim poorly in their direction if needed." They moved out of the mine together. The lion went first. That surprised Clara. The animal lifted one cub by the scruff and carried it into the falling snow, climbing toward the rocks with silent strength. Then she returned for the second. She did not wait for Clara, but she did not leave them entirely either. She kept pausing, looking back, choosing the path. "Seems she knows more about escape than either of us," Jonah said. "She has more to lose." Clara helped him up the slope. The climb was cruel. Loose stones slid under their boots. Snow hid gaps between rocks. Twice Jonah nearly fell, and twice Clara caught him by the belt, dragging him upright with a strength born less from muscle than refusal. Below them, men burst from the mine entrance. Rusk saw them at once. "There," he shouted. A shot rang out. The bullet struck stone above Clara and sent chips flying against her cheek. The mountain lion snarled from the ridge. Rusk's men hesitated. One of them shouted, "That devil cat's up there too." "Then shoot around it," Rusk snapped. "Not at it. Pierce wants the woman, not a dead cub story spreading through town." Even now, Clara thought, he understood appearances. Men like Pierce and Rusk did not fear wrong. They feared witnesses. They feared stories reaching the wrong ears. That thought gave her something sharp to hold. "Jonah," she said, "if I do not get down this mountain, you tell it." He looked at her as they climbed. "Do not speak like that. You tell all of it. Nathan, Lily, Gideon, the bridge, the land office, the names. You tell it yourself. Promise me." His face twisted with pain, but not only from the wound. "I promise." The words had barely left him when the snow ahead shifted. A rider appeared at the top of Raven Notch. Then another. For one terrible breath, Clara thought Rusk had circled them. But these men wore long dark coats marked with brass stars pinned near the collar. Federal marshals, 3 of them. Behind them sat an older man on a gray horse, white-haired, straight-backed, with a blanket over his knees and a shotgun resting across his saddle. Jonah whispered, "Judge Whittaker." Clara stared, "The judge." Gideon must have reached him. The old man lifted one gloved hand. His voice carried down through the snow, dry and firm. "Mrs. Whitcomb, I believe you are carrying property of interest to a federal court." Clara almost sank to her knees. Below, Amos Rusk stopped climbing. The judge's eyes moved past Clara to the men below. "Mr. Rusk," he called, "I would advise you to lower your weapon unless you wish to explain your poor manners before supper." Rusk did not lower it. Instead, his face changed. All calm left him, all polish. What remained was a cornered man with too much guilt behind him and not enough road ahead. He aimed at Clara. The mountain lion came out of the snow like a shadow given teeth. She did not tear into him. She struck him hard enough to knock him sideways, sending his shot wild into the ridge. Rusk fell against the rocks, his gun spinning from his hand. The lion stood over him, snarling, one paw pinning his coat while he lay frozen beneath her. No man moved. Not Rusk's men. Not Jonah. Not even the marshals. Clara stood in the falling snow with Nathan's coat on her back and Lily's box against her spine, watching a wild mother hold judgment over the man who had helped steal her child. If this moment made you feel that justice can arrive in ways no one expects, stay with Clara a little longer, because Caldwell Pierce has not yet faced the truth waiting in that coat. Judge Whittaker rode down slowly, the marshals beside him. He stopped before Clara and removed his hat. Not to greet her. To honor what she carried. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said gently, "is Gideon Vale alive?" Clara looked at Jonah. Jonah looked toward the high rocks beyond Raven Notch, where an old trail disappeared into snow and mist. "I don't know," Clara said. The judge's face grew heavy. Then from above them, faint but clear, came the sound of a man coughing inside the storm. The cough came again from the high rocks, thin and broken, almost lost beneath the wind. Every person on the slope turned toward it. The mountain lion still stood over Amos Rusk, her body low, her teeth bared, her breath rising white in the snow. Rusk did not move. His face had gone the color of old ash. The pistol lay several feet from his hand, half buried in powder. Judge Whittaker lifted his shotgun slightly, not aiming it at anyone, only reminding the world that age had not made him harmless. "Marshal Boone," he said, "secure Mr. Rusk." One of the marshals dismounted and moved carefully toward Rusk, keeping a respectful distance from the lion. Clara watched the animal's ears flick. The marshal stopped at once. Clara stepped forward. "Easy," she said softly. The lion looked at her. No one breathed. Then the animal backed away from Rusk and climbed onto a flat stone near her cubs. She did not leave. She simply gave the men permission to do what needed doing. The marshal took Rusk's weapon, pulled him to his feet, and bound his hands. Rusk stared at Clara with hatred, but hatred looked smaller now that he was tied. The cough came a third time. Jonah pushed himself off the rock wall, pale and unsteady. "Gideon." Clara turned toward him. "You know that sound." "I know a man trying not to die before finishing his work." The judge's face tightened. "Show us." They climbed toward the rocks above Raven Notch. The snow was coming harder, filling tracks almost as soon as they were made. Clara carried Nathan's coat bundle close against her chest now, though her burned hands throbbed with every step. Jonah stumbled twice. A marshal finally took his good arm and helped him, despite Jonah's prideful silence. At the top of the notch, the old trail narrowed between two leaning stones. Behind them was a dark slit in the ridge, hidden unless a person knew exactly where to look. From inside came the smell of damp earth, smoke, and sickness. "Gideon," Jonah called. A voice answered from within, "Took you long enough." The words were weak, but they held a dry edge that made Jonah close his eyes in relief. Clara ducked into the opening after the judge. Inside was a small cave, just deep enough to hold a man, a blanket, a few tins, and a tiny fire that had burned down to red coals. Gideon Vale lay against the stone wall with a gray beard over a hollow face. One leg was wrapped in stained cloth. His eyes, though sunken, were alive and sharp. When he saw Clara, he tried to sit straighter. She knew him at once, though she had never met him, not by face, by guilt. Some people carried guilt like a hidden knife. Gideon carried his like a lantern he could not put down. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "Nathan said you were taller than most men's courage." Clara stood still. There were a dozen things she could have said. She could have thanked him. She could have asked why he had waited. She could have struck him with every hour of pain he had allowed her to carry without truth. Instead, she held up Lily's ribbon box. Gideon's face broke. Not loudly, not with tears at first. It simply folded inward as if the sight of that small box had struck the last strength out of him. "I should have brought it to you," he whispered. "I should have come myself." "Yes," Clara said. The single word filled the cave. Gideon lowered his eyes. "I was afraid." Clara stepped closer. "Of Pierce. Of what the truth would do to you." A bitter laugh rose in her throat, but it came out as breath. The truth could not have buried them twice. Gideon nodded, and this time tears did come, cutting clean lines through the dirt on his cheeks. "Nathan wrote me before he died. Said he had found men marking land they had no claim to. Said if anything happened, I should look at Pierce. I thought he was being careful. I thought there was time." "There was not." "No." Judge Whittaker removed his gloves and knelt beside the little fire. "Mr. Vale, can you testify?" Gideon looked at him. "If you can keep me alive long enough to reach a courtroom." "We will do better than try." Clara placed Nathan's coat bundle on the ground and untied it. The papers were dry. The ledgers, letters, bridge diagram, payment records, and Lily's box lay in the dim cave, light like pieces of a life finally gathered from a wreck. Gideon pointed to a flat packet tied in red string near his blanket. "That goes with them. Names Pierce never wrote down. Men he paid through church donations, cattle purchases, false freight bills. One judge, 2 land clerks, a sheriff. And Amos Rusk signed receipt for the bridge work, though he was fool enough to call it timber repair." Judge Whittaker's mouth hardened. Outside the cave, Rusk shouted, "Lies." Gideon closed his eyes, still loud when cornered. Clara turned toward the entrance. Rusk stood below with the marshals around him, his bound hands clenched. The mountain lion watched from the rocks above, her cubs tucked against her side. Snow gathered on her back like a white shawl. Judge Whittaker stepped from the cave with the red packet in hand. "Mr. Rusk," he said, "you will have your chance to deny these matters under oath." Rusk spat into the snow. "Pierce owns half the men who wear badges in this territory." The judge's voice stayed calm. "Then we shall find the half he does not own." That quiet sentence moved through the men like a bell. For the first time, Rusk looked uncertain. Clara noticed one of Rusk's hired riders lower his head. Another would not meet the judge's eyes. Paid hands could follow money for a long while, but when a federal judge, 3 marshals, a living witness, and a widow with proof stood in the snow together, money began to feel less like power and more like a rope. Jonah sank onto a stone, his wounded shoulder bleeding again. Clara went to him. "You need binding." He tried to wave her away. "Gideon first." Do not become noble all at once. It will confuse me." Despite the pain, he smiled faintly. She tore a strip from her skirt hem and tied his wound as best she could. Her burned fingers fumbled, but she managed. Jonah watched her hands. "You should hate me more," he said quietly. "I may yet." "That is fair." She pulled the knot tight, "but you came back." His eyes dropped, too late. "Yes," she said, "but back." Below them, one marshal led Rusk's men together and took their weapons. The judge spoke with Gideon in low tones, gathering enough strength from the old man's words to begin building the case before they ever left the mountain. Then the wind changed. The mountain lion lifted her head. Clara saw it a second later. Far below, through a break in the snow, lanterns moved on the western trail. Not one, not five. Many. Jonah stood too quickly and nearly fell. Pierce. Judge Whittaker looked down the mountain. The lanterns climbed in a long, crooked line, bright as sparks moving through dusk. Rusk began to laugh. Soft at first, then louder. "You think papers stop Caldwell Pierce," he said. "You think an old judge and a widow frighten him." Clara picked up Lily's box and held it against her heart. The judge turned toward the marshals. "Prepare to hold this ridge." Gideon coughed from inside the cave, weak but alive. The lion stood over her cubs. And below them, Caldwell Pierce came up the mountain with enough men to make the snow itself glow. Caldwell Pierce came up the mountain like a man who believed the earth had already signed itself over to him. His lanterns moved through the snow in a long, crooked line. Horses snorted in the cold. Men's voices rose and fell below the ridge, rough with effort and anger. At their center rode a broad man in a fur-collared coat, his beard silver at the chin, his face red from wind and power. Even from above, Clara could see the shape of him, not large in body alone, large in certainty. He expected the mountain to make room. Judge Whittaker stood at the edge of Raven Notch with the red packet tucked inside his coat and his shotgun resting across one arm. The marshals spread out behind the rocks. Jonah sat near the cave mouth, pale but awake. Gideon lay wrapped in blankets, breathing hard, his eyes fixed on the trail below. The mountain lion stood higher than all of them, her cubs behind her, her golden eyes watching the lanterns rise. Pierce stopped below the notch and looked up. "Judge Whittaker," he called, "you are far from your courtroom." The judge's voice came back steady. "And you are far too close to federal evidence, Mr. Pierce." Pierce laughed. It was a practiced sound, made for banks, offices, and crowded rooms where men wanted to feel safe near money. "You have been misled by thieves and bitter people." Clara stepped forward with Lily's ribbon box in her hands. Pierce's eyes found her. For a moment he looked almost amused. "Mrs. Whitcomb," he said, "you have made a sad mistake climbing into matters beyond you." Clara looked down at him through the falling snow. "My husband thought the same bridge was beneath him until your man cut it." The word silenced the slope. Rusk, bound between two marshals, lowered his head. Pierce did not look at him. That was his first mistake. The judge turned slightly. "Mr. Rusk, this would be the hour to consider how much loyalty a condemned man receives from his employer." Rusk's jaw worked. Snow gathered on his hat brim. For a long moment he said nothing. Pierce's voice cracked like a whip. "Keep your mouth shut." That was his second mistake. Rusk looked up then, and whatever had held him to Pierce finally broke. "He ordered it," he said. "Willow Crossing, the cabin, Gideon Vale, all of it." Pierce's face changed. "Not much, just enough." The judge heard it. Clara saw it. Every man on that ridge felt the small shift that comes when a powerful lie loses its roof. Pierce lifted one hand toward his riders. "Take them." But the riders did not move. Not at once. They had seen the marshals. They had heard Rusk. They had seen the judge standing in the snow with the calm of a man who did not frighten easy. and they had seen Clara Whitcomb, tall and burned and grieving, holding a child's box like it weighed more than silver. One rider lowered his rifle first. Then another. A third pulled his horse back. Pierce turned on them with fury in his face. Cowards. Judge Whittaker raised his voice. Any man who lays down his weapon now will be treated as a witness, not a fool. That finished it. Weapons dropped into the snow one by one. Pierce sat alone among his own men. For the first time, he looked smaller than the mountain. The marshals went down and took him without a shot fired. He argued until they bound his hands. He threatened judges, land clerks, governors, banks, newspapers, and every name he believed could still shelter him. Judge Whittaker only listened, then said, "You may save that thunder for court." When Pierce was led past Clara, he stopped. "You think this brings them back?" The question was meant to cut her. For a breath it did. Clara looked at Lily's box. She saw the blue ribbon, Nathan's careful carving, 2 graves under rain. "No," she said, "but it stops you from taking anyone else." Pierce had no answer for that. By morning the storm broke. The sky opened clear and pale over Hollow Crown Ridge. Sunlight touched the snow and made the whole mountain shine as if every stone had been washed clean in the night. Gideon was carried down on a litter made from pine poles. Jonah rode beside him, one arm bound tight, his face gray but stubborn. Rusk rode under guard. Pierce rode in silence. Clara walked part of the way. In her pack were the papers that would tear open Pierce's empire. In her hands was Lily's ribbon box. Weeks later in Cheyenne, the trial began. It did not heal her. Clara learned that truth did not mend a heart the way people hoped. It did not fill an empty chair or bring back a laugh from the next room, but it did give shape to the pain. It gave Nathan his honor back. It gave Lily more than a story about rain and bad luck. It gave their names weight in a room full of men who had once tried to make them disappear. Gideon testified from a chair, weak but clear. Jonah testified too. He did not hide what he had done. He named every map, every mark, every choice he had made too late. Clara watched him speak and understood that some men did not escape guilt. They learned to carry it in service of something better. Rusk's confession sealed the bridge case. The ledgers sealed the land theft. The red packet sealed the names of those who had been bought. Caldwell Pierce was sentenced before spring. His mines were seized. His false claims were broken. The men he had paid began speaking against one another like frightened birds startled from a dead tree. Judge Whittaker called it justice. Clara called it a beginning. By summer, a federal post stood near the old cabin. They asked Clara to oversee the ridge. She said yes. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she finally did. The cabin was repaired. The burned window was replaced. Nathan's coat, too scorched to wear, was folded in a cedar chest beneath the hearth. Lily's ribbon box sat on the mantel where morning light could touch the carved swallow. One evening, near the first gold of autumn, Clara stepped onto the porch and saw the mountain lion at the edge of the clearing. The cubs were larger now, long-legged and curious, tumbling through the grass behind their mother. The lion looked at Clara for a long, quiet moment. Clara did not move. Neither did the mountain. Then the lion turned and led her young into the trees. Clara watched until they vanished. On the porch rail, she carved one small swallow with open wings. If this story touched your heart, remember Clara's lesson. Truth may come late, but when brave people carry it forward, even the coldest mountain can become a place of healing. That night, as the first star rose over Hollow Crown Ridge, Clara Whitcomb lit the porch lantern and left it burning, not for the dead, but for anyone still trying to find their way home.